Hey guys, Super Nintendo here, and let's talk about the retro video game bubble. Every month or so, somebody talks about how prices are going to fall below pre-2008 levels any minute now, and we'll be able to get a lot of 100 Nintendo games for about $100, and there'll be a Little Samson and a Bubble Bobble Part 2 in there. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's not too far out of the realm of what people are thinking. And I really don't think that we're going to see that anytime soon. And so I figured that I would go over a couple of points to kind of explain why I think that that's not going to happen. So when people talk about the retro video game bubble, they kind of compare it to the housing bubble of 2008. Now, the housing bubble, what that was is prices of houses were artificially inflated. People were buying stuff that they couldn't afford. And when the economy took a downhill and people lost their jobs, a lot of people couldn't make those payments on the houses and they had to foreclose. So then when the houses were foreclosed, the banks needed to get rid of those for a very, very reduced price. And a lot of opportunistic people who actually had money to capitalize on that were able to scoop up houses really cheap and then sell them once the housing market got better. So now that we know what the housing bubble is, does that mean that it's going to translate into a retro video game bubble bursting the same way? Well, the short answer is no. Retro video gaming collecting has evolved into its gigantic economy, and that means that even though there have been some games that have dropped significantly in price, doesn't mean that the retro video game economy as a whole is unstable or unsustainable. So video game collecting has been around since video games have existed. Pre-2000 era, you saw people scooping up video games just as we are now, except they had an advantage. Basically, they were able to pick up lots of video games from video game stores that were either going out of business or just clearing out stock for the new systems that were coming in. Essentially, if you have copies of NES games and the Super Nintendo and the N64 are coming out and nobody's really renting Nintendo anymore, then it makes no sense to keep it in your shelf, so they would liquidate the inventory and sell out just lots of it. So eBay wasn't as big as it is now, but it definitely was something that you could use. And so that's kind of like what people consider the golden age of video game collecting. Just mountains of video games as far as the eye can see. People were just scooping it up for pennies on the dollar just because it wasn't popular. And I really don't think that we're going to go back to the golden age of video game collecting anytime soon. You have a lot of YouTube personalities like the Angry Video Game Nerd and Metal Jesus Rocks who make video game popular. Anytime that those guys talk about a video game, searches for that specific game, especially if it's a good game, will spike and the price kind of jumps as well. And also you have more collectors in the scene. You're starting to see video game collectors who are collecting systems that were around long before they were. And they also have a little bit more income to get into these video game collecting markets and buy the games faster. And also there's just more systems to collect for than there was 17 or more years ago. I currently have about 20 systems in my collection, and all of those games have something to collect, and some of those games are over 30 years old, with my youngest system being the Switch. And of course, there's plenty of more systems out there that a lot of people have actually collected. Some of them are just hidden gems, and some of them are just garbage, like the N-Gage or the Atari Lynx or the Wonder Swan. Those are just systems that have had a resurgence because people keep on digging for cheaper alternatives. So if you look at the video game economy as a whole, it doesn't have any signs of slowing down anytime soon. And there's probably not going to be a significant crash anytime soon because there aren't a lot of people taking out bank loans to get these video games. At least I hope not. And if they are, they're making a really poor investment. So even though the retro video game bubble isn't going to burst anytime soon, it does have smaller bubbles that relate to the specific game that have burst and caused a lot of devaluation. Take, for example, Devil's Third. Now, this game is terrible, so why would anybody want it? Well, I'll tell you why. The basically what happened was is that this game had been scheduled to come out in the United States, and the game had been reviewed so terribly that Nintendo had essentially dropped all support. Now, the rumor was is that there were only going to be 750 copies of this game released in the United States nationwide, and it would be a GameStop exclusive. So what happened? Well, people like myself caught wind of that and quickly snatched up a copy, because we didn't want this to become another Panzer Dragoon or Little Samson or some other game that comes in the tail end of the Wii U cycle that ends up being a ton of money because nobody can find it. So obviously I jumped at it, and a lot of people eventually caught wind that this was going to be super rare, so people started paying $120 to $130 for this game. So of course the game kept rising. People were buying it at that price, only caring that it was going to be super rare. They didn't even care that it was a good game. So what happened was is that about a couple of days later, Nintendo decided to release 10,000 copies into the wild. So what happened was is that valuation of that game dropped tremendously. So you can probably find this game for about $60 brand new. And that's probably where it's going to stay for a very long time. It's very unlikely that this game is ever going to reach the high price that it was when it first came out. So markets correct themselves all the time, and when Shenmue 3 was announced on Kickstarter, that caused Shenmue and Shenmue 2 to skyrocket in price. I believe that Shenmue for the Dreamcast almost quadrupled in value. It was originally about a $20 game, and then it shot up to almost $100 complete, which a lot of people were scrambling to get because now they're interested in Shenmue and now they want this game. Well, what happened was is that eventually Shenmue went back down to its original price, and now you can get it for about $25 complete again. It's just the popularity of Shenmue 3 when it came out for that Kickstarter caused a huge boon in the price. And luckily, if you still want to pick it up now that if you've been patient, you can get it for what it's originally going for and what people are actually paying for it. So also, when a character is announced in Smash, their game titles tend to jump in price as well. Take, for example, Bayonetta being announced as a playable character. Bayonetta 2, for the longest time, this was on clearance for about $20. You could get the copy of Bayonetta 1 also, and Bayonetta 2 was a Wii U exclusive. So basically what happened was is that as soon as Bayonetta was announced in Smash, everybody wanted to play Bayonetta 2. So what happened is the price just skyrocketed. You couldn't find a copy of Bayonetta 2 because it was out of print for anything less than about $60 to $70. And that was really troublesome for a lot of people because they wanted to play this game now. So if you really wanted to play Bayonetta 2 at that time, you had to plunk down $60, $70 for this particular copy. But again, Nintendo came out and reprinted Bayonetta 2. Obviously, it doesn't come with Bayonetta 1, but for $30, you can pick up Bayonetta 2 brand new and play it, which is a really good deal. And it caused a drop in the valuation of this particular copy. It's still more expensive than the regular Bayonetta 2, but there's not too big of a difference. So another reason why the video game collecting scene is safe for now is that it can survive introductions of brand new stock. And maybe it'll probably have a little fluctuation to it, but for the most part, introducing a brand new copy of a video game isn't really going to affect the price too much. Take Earthbound, for example. Now, Earthbound is about $200 depending on the condition. You're probably not going to pay much more than that for loose copy, but you can actually play Earthbound in a number of ways. You can play it on the Wii U, you can play it on the Wii, you can play it on the 3DS, and you can play it on the Super Nintendo Classic. The Wii U obviously is the best way to go, It's about $10. It was actually free if you entered in your platinum points for the Nintendo Club, but that hasn't really affected the price of this game. Maybe it's dropped $5 or $6 or so. It kind of fluctuates just a little bit, but it hasn't caused a massive devaluation in this game. This is still one of the more expensive games on the Super Nintendo, and it doesn't show signs of bottoming out anytime soon. So speaking of classic editions, you can't really have a video game economic discussion without mentioning the NES Classic Edition. Now, the NES Classic Edition is one of the best examples that I can provide how one item can have its own market with its own bubble and its own price fluctuations. Now, this thing was released in November of last year, and basically what happened is that not a lot of people were interested in it. They thought it would be cool, but then all of a sudden you couldn't find it. And then the price gouging just went crazy. This thing was at its highest about $400, and then it came down to about like $200, and you were able to find it a little bit into 2017. I was able to pick mine up from GameStop. I had to order like a controller bundle, but it still was worth the extra $20 premium that I had to pay, knowing that I could have that. And then literally a week later, they announced that it was canceled. So that shot the price up, way back up, and people were just scrambling to find this thing. It was maybe $250 to $300 back again, and people were very upset that the price just had gotten that high. And then it kind of slowed down just a little bit, and it got back down to about 140, 170, around that range. And then the Super Nintendo Classic Edition was announced, and again the price went right back up, and people were trying to buy this thing again. So people were still paying up to $300 for this little guy, and then the Amazon Treasure Truck came along. So I don't know if you guys know what the Amazon Treasure Truck is, or if it's available in your area, but basically they were selling these little guys in July for retail price. So if you were lucky enough to live in a city that had a treasure truck and you got up early enough, you would just go in and get your NES Classic Edition, and that was it. So with the Super Nintendo Classic, that went a little south really quickly. Basically, Nintendo had stated that they're going to make more, but they're only going to make it until 2018. That's what they said when they first came out with that. And when pre-orders came up, you saw with the Walmart debacle, and then the pre-orders came up like instantaneously while people were asleep, and it sold out so fast that people were paying upwards to $400 for these bundles, and people were just upset at Nintendo, and rightfully so, because they were told that Nintendo would have enough, and the panic that happened caused the valuation of the Super Nintendo to skyrocket. Now, then Nintendo had come out, made an official statement, which they rarely ever do on rare items like this, and they said, don't pay the scalpers, we'll have enough for you, just be patient. And for the most part, that's been correct. There were a lot of Super Nintendo Classic at launch. They announced that they were going to make these well into 2018, and they also said that they're going to remake the NES Classic Edition. So that definitely should keep prices in check, and perhaps if they create enough Super Nintendo Classic, it's going to cause the current bubble right now to drop. And it's quite possible that a lot of people are going to be looking to get rid of their Super Nintendo Classics for at retail or just a little bit below. But I don't think that's going to happen until at least after Christmas. So how can a video game economy collapse? Now, there's only a couple of scenarios, and they're pretty out there. One of them would be that Nintendo decides that they found a cache of Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, all the rare ones, in a warehouse somewhere. They decided that they're going to release them all There's like 1,000 to 10,000 copies of Little Samson. They're going to release sealed copies for $50 a piece, and anyone who wants one can get one. Now that's going to cause prices of really high games to just tank, and then the valuation and the allure of having a rare game will be gone. So a lot of people might start to panic and actually try to sell their copy before Nintendo sells theirs to get the maximum amount of money out of theirs. A much more realistic scenario would be for the economy to collapse. Now, it's really not something that I really want to think about anytime soon, but video games are a luxury. I don't need these to survive. If it turned out that there was a time where I had to choose between video games and having my electric or food for the next couple of weeks, I would have to sell my video game collection. And there are a lot of people who probably have that same video game collecting habit, but they're spending outside of their means, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're only one disaster away from having to sell their games. And that's pretty much what would cause a huge panic to do, is like if everybody decided that they needed to sell their collection, and they would have to sell it fast. So the faster you need to sell something, the cheaper it's going to be. So if bills are due by the end of the month and you only have 10 days to the left of the month, you're probably going to sell your huge collection for maybe 30 to 40% of what it's actually worth, because nobody really has the time to sit and get the entire maximum value of your collection, or you're just going to want to liquidate really fast. And that could cause, especially if a lot of people do it, and it's only if a lot of people do it, that would cause the video game collecting scene to just collapse on itself. So, I mean, like, the real takeaway about this is that if you're looking to invest in video games, don't. Video game collecting definitely isn't a sure bet. It's definitely a short-term thing if you want to find specific items and then sell them right away, like the Super Nintendo Classic Edition or the NES Classic Edition. Basically, this video game collecting scene isn't guaranteed to last forever. There could be very well a collapse coming, but I really think that if you're looking to invest into video games, it's not really a good idea. You should definitely collect within your means and buy what you can afford and what you can enjoy. That's pretty much been my mantra of video games. There are a lot of expensive video games that I would love to have in my collection, but I think twice about it and I say, can I really part with $1,000 for Little Samson and actually be happy? It's kind of a debate that I always have. So I make sure to always find the best deals and only buy video games when I know I definitely can afford it. So what do you think about the retro video game collecting bubble? Do you think it's going to pop anytime soon? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And if you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. And if you like my content, please subscribe. I'm Super Nintendo, and I'll see you next time.